About a week ago, I was driving down to Texas. It was a long drive, one that would take 2 days unless I drove non-stop throughout the night. However, I was eager to reach my destination and I chose to tough it out for the sake of getting there sooner. The drive started out relatively normal. I drove for a couple of hours south and I felt good. I had my music cranked and a cooler full of energy drinks in the passenger seat. When I saw the sign saying, "Now entering Tennessee," I thought I was making record time. I must have forgotten to watch the clock though, because the sun began to set. I was particularly confused, mainly due to the fact that I had left earlier in the day. But I disregarded it as the idle distractions I created for myself to pass the time faster, being the cause. Something else odd I noticed was the open freeway. Normally I would expect to see many vehicles all traveling to different places, but instead I seemed to be the only one out and about. Still, I wasn't feeling tired, and I had already committed to driving straight through the night, even if things seemed strange. But as I drove on, I realized that the sun had set far too quickly, and with the lack of vehicles on the road, it looked like I was driving in a void. The blackened world around me was only illuminated by my high beams, but I could only see perhaps 15 feet ahead of me. There were a few normalities like guardrails and mile markers, but if something were to appear in front of me, I'd likely hit it because of my lack of visibility. So I pulled over. My vehicle came to a subtle halt on the side of the freeway, and I turned on my emergency lights. Realistically, I knew it wasn't a fog. It was just dark, darker than the world behind my eyelids. I suppose I wanted to see another car pass by before I concluded that something had gone wrong. But none came. I waited for more than 20 minutes and not one car or truck barreled down the freeway. I decided to roll my window down and allow some fresh air into my car. Plus, I was slightly panicking because I have somewhere to be and this was taking up precious time. Suddenly, the engine shut off. Even the accessory power had gone cold. I performed some percussive maintenance by smacking my hand against the dash, as if it would magically fix everything, but it obviously didn't. Then I heard a quiet ticking sound. You know, the sound your fingers make when you tap them against a table. It was like that, but instead of the soft, fleshy contact you get from the skin of your digits, it was more like the clicking of nails against plastic. My intuition told me that it was coming from under the hood, and therefore I'd have to step outside. But just as I was about to open the door, I almost had a heart attack because hanging over the trim of the window was a hand. I freaked out and flung myself into the passenger seat on top of my cooler. The hand was tapping its pale white fingers against the inner part of my door, and after my initial fear died down, I thought that it may have been someone looking to help me. Foolish, I know, but I did have my hazards on. A part of me knew full well that another vehicle hadn't pulled up behind mine, while I was distracted by the engine malfunction, but I still inquired, "Hello, who's there?" The finger stopped moving, and the hand slipped down slowly over the side of the door, out of sight. I waited while trying to catch my breath before asking again, "Hey, who's there? Why are you messing with me?" No sound, not even crickets responded to me. I turned my head to peer out the rear window, and couldn't see anything, which made me wonder more as to who was outside of my car. My ear was pressed against the passenger window, and just as I was about to slide back into the driver's seat, I heard the tapping a second time right next to my ear. I nearly got whiplash from the speed at which I turned my head to look out the window. There wasn't anything there, in terms of a tapping hand. However, there were fingerprints left in the condensation on the outside of the glass. My heart raced and I crawled back into the driver's seat and tried to stupidly roll the window up, even though I quickly realized that that was futile. Then I started to hear footsteps in the gravel on the side of the asphalt, but when I looked in my mirrors, I saw nothing. That was until my headlights came on without warning. They flashed brightly ahead of me and illuminated the figure of a human standing directly in the light. But I couldn't see who it was because they were missing their head. The headless torso held out its thumb as if it were hitchhiking. However, it only did so for a moment before beginning to approach my vehicle. I tried to start the engine, but for some reason my key wouldn't crank. And then I thought, if the headlights are on, surely I should be able to at least roll up the window. It moved slowly towards me with a shambling, unstable gait. Unfortunate for me, my window wouldn't go up, even when fiddling with the keys in the ignition. I started to panic and sweat began forming on the palms of my hands. By the time it was at the corner of the driver's side, I decided I would get out and confront it. As I reached for the door handle and pulled, I found that it wouldn't open. I have one of those stupid pull-up locks that sink into the door, so I wasn't able to grip it and force it up. The electronic unlock didn't work either, so my only option was to climb out the window. The problem was it had already reached my side mirror. There was no way I would be able to crawl through the window without that thing grabbing me. So once again I slid into the passenger seat, with my feet poised to kick if it tried to worm its unnatural way inside. From there I could see it was a masculine body that was exceedingly tall, and it wore a gray sweatshirt laden with holes. It had scuffed pants with tread marks denoting a tire had crossed over them at ludicrous speed. If I had to guess, I'd say they'd been run over. As it tried to reach its arm inside, I kicked it away. It didn't appear to have much more than primal instinct, because it took some time to regain itself. Still, regardless of the fact that it was a brainless walking corpse, I was still terrified. When it reached inside the second time, I scooted myself towards the driver's seat and forcibly jammed my foot against its chest, sending it falling to the ground. I used the opportunity to get out of the car via the open window and run around to the trunk. I couldn't open it without the key, which I stupidly left inside, but at least I could get away. As it rose to its feet, I felt an immense pressure in my head, as if someone was squeezing my brain. My vision became blurry and different parts of my body burned with a fiery intensity. Every time I tried to move one of my limbs, I couldn't, and the paralysis weaving its way throughout my body made me an easy target. The headless torso continued shuffling its disjointed feet in my direction with an outstretched hand, but the other was to its side with its thumb out. Suddenly, my faculties snapped back into my control and I was able to avoid its mindless descent by stepping to the other side of my vehicle. I don't know what made me think the car would start if I tried again, but despite my former failures, I awkwardly jumped inside and turned the key. My eyes widened with joy when the engine turned over, followed by the familiar rumble of the vehicle running. I threw the shifter into drive and slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation and sped off into the dark. I thought I was in the clear and my breathing slowly returned to normal. It was odd that some strange part of me thought that maybe it was just a ghost that was asking for help, but that was highly improbable, and now I know that wasn't the case. The freeway was still obscured by the all-encompassing darkness, but I didn't care. I just kept driving. Then my heart skipped a beat because standing on the side of the road was the headless person. I drove by but couldn't see them in my rearview mirror due to the darkness. I took a deep breath and drove on without trying to think about it too much. While taking a look at my clock to see what time it was, it read all zeros. Great, I said aloud, still maintaining a relatively high speed. My hands were firmly gripping the steering wheel, and I kept thinking that it was over. But I was wrong again. Like before, I saw the body standing adjacent to the freeway. With an outstretched thumb, it started walking into the road as if it were trying to be hit. I avoided it and continued on completely freaked out. I took a peek in my rearview mirror, and I could have sworn it was sitting in my back seat. But as I quickly glanced over my shoulder, it was just an empty seat. My paranoia was somewhat satiated when I saw it again, but now it was holding something in its hand. As I drove by, I narrowed my eyes to see it closer. It was holding a smiling head. At this point, I was close to fainting from the fear. I just wanted this horror loop to end. But as that thought crossed my mind, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof of my car. I jumped in my seat, startled by the sound, and looked up. Obviously, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear movement, and I could sense the weight lurking above. Regrettably, during all the chaos, I still forgot to roll the window up, which I admit was entirely my fault, much to my dismay. I say that because the sound suddenly stopped, and I thought it was over once again. But when I looked to my left, I was met face to face with a severed head. The body was on the roof holding the head in my open window. I yelled and it tossed the head inside and it latched onto my thigh, biting deeply into my muscle. It laughed maniacally and I nearly crashed trying to deal with both the head and keeping my vehicle on the road. I yelled out in pain and began pounding my fist against the back of its head. Luckily, one of my attacks dislodged it from my leg, and I grabbed onto it with my free hand before throwing it out the window. All at once, the darkness lifted, and I was able to see the head bouncing down the freeway in my mirror, followed by the body it belonged to sliding off my roof only to tumble onto the road. I was breathing so hard I thought I might lose consciousness, and my leg was bleeding pretty badly, but I dare not stop. I started to see other vehicles, and that's when I finally allowed myself to feel any sort of relief. The events I had experienced shocked my system, and I decided I would pull off at the nearest town and get a motel for the rest of the night. When I found one, the lady at the counter said, "Your face is so pale, are you okay?" I looked deeply into her eyes and said, "There was a man, or rather, a body on the freeway without a head. It terrorized me and it nearly killed me." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Oh, you young people, you always have the craziest stories. Although I do seem to remember someone else saying something about a body on the freeway once." My eyes lit up. "What did they say? What happened to them?" "Well, nothing happened. We called the police, but they found no body, nor did they find any evidence of an accident. The person ended up leaving the next morning, and that was that." "Huh," I uttered softly. I got a room for the night and addressed my wound. It wasn't as bad as I originally thought. It must have been the lighting that made it look worse. I stayed until around early morning, and then checked out with barely any sleep. Now I'm telling you to avoid driving on any freeway if you're going to Texas. I mean, I can't say for sure what the catalyst is, but something to do with my specific trip caused me to experience this horrific anomaly, and I just want to warn everyone I can. Although the lady at the counter did say someone else experienced something similar. I just don't know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. What's even worse is that when I was about to get into my car to continue my drive south, I noticed a fresh handprint pressed firmly against the outside of my driver's window. I guess I'll be sticking to day driving from now on.